My name is Sophia, and I'm the youngest of three daughters in what used to be a pretty average family. Growing up, our lives seemed normal enough. Dad worked all day, while Mom stayed home, taking care of us and the house. I was always closer to Dad than Mom. He'd come home tired from work, but he'd still find time to ask about my day. Mom, on the other hand, always seemed distracted, lost in her own world of housework and gossip with the neighbors. Sophia, did you finish your homework? Mom would ask, not really listening for my answer as she stirred a pot on the stove. Yeah, Mom? Can I go play outside now? She'd wave me off, already turning back to whatever she was cooking. My sisters, Anna and Maria, were allowed more freedom. Being older had its perks, I guess. Everything changed when I turned 10. It started with a fever and a pain in my knee. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my leg throbbing, while Mom bustled around making dinner. Mom, my knee really hurts, I said, wincing as I tried to stretch my leg. She barely glanced at me. You're fine, Sophia. Stop trying to get attention. But I wasn't fine. The fever lasted for days, and the pain in my knee got worse. Finally, after what felt like forever, Dad put his foot down. We're taking her to the hospital, he said firmly, ignoring Mom's protests about the cost. The ride to the hospital is a blur in my memory. I remember the cool touch of the doctor's hands, the worried frown on his face as he examined me. And then, the words that changed everything. I'm afraid your daughter has leukemia. The room spun. Mom gasped, Dad went pale, and I didn't really understand what it meant. Not then. But I knew it was bad from the way the adults were acting. What does that mean? I asked, my voice small and scared. The doctor knelt beside me, his eyes kind but serious. It means you're very sick, Sophia. But we're going to do everything we can to make you better. As we left the hospital that day, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. I looked small and pale, nothing like the happy, energetic girl I'd been just a week ago. I didn't know it then, but that girl was gone forever. The next few months were a blur of hospital visits, needles, and more pain than I thought possible. Chemotherapy, they called it. To me, it felt like poison running through my veins, making me sicker than the disease itself. I remember the day my hair started falling out. I was sitting on my bed, idly running my fingers through my long brown hair, when a clump came away in my hand. I stared at it, not quite believing what I was seeing. Mom, I called out, my voice shaking. She came rushing in, took one look at the hair in my hand, and burst into tears. Oh, Sophia, she sobbed, pulling me into a hug. It was one of the few times during my illness that she showed any real emotion towards me. As the days went by, I lost more than just my hair. My eyelashes fell out, then my eyebrows. Every time I looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back at me. I stopped going outside, too ashamed of my appearance. I was stuck at home, missing school, missing my friends, missing my life. One day, I overheard Mom talking on the phone. It's so hard, she was saying. Sophia's always been difficult, but this, I don't know how much more I can take. Her words stung more than any needle ever could. Was I really such a burden? The treatment seemed to be working, though. Slowly but surely, I started to feel better. The doctors were optimistic, talking about remission and recovery. For the first time in months, I dared to hope. Then, just as quickly as that hope had come, it was snatched away. The pain in my knee returned, worse than before. The fevers came back. And with them, the terrifying realization that the cancer was back too. We need to do a bone marrow transplant, the doctor explained to my parents. I sat there, trying to understand what that meant. It's her best chance. Can we be donors? Dad asked, his voice tight with worry. The doctor nodded. We'll need to run some tests, but yes, parents are often the best match. I watched as both my parents were tested. Mom went first, then Dad. The wait for the results felt like an eternity. Finally, the doctor called us all into his office. His face was grave, and I felt my heart sink before he even spoke. "I'm afraid I have some unexpected news," he began. "Mrs. Johnson, you're not a suitable donor for Sophia." Mom nodded, looking disappointed but not surprised. But then the doctor turned to my dad, and his next words turned my world upside down. "Mr. Johnson, our tests show that you're not biologically related to Sophia." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at my parents, confused. Dad's face had gone white, while Mom looked like she was about to be sick. Dad suddenly exploded. "It means your mother's been lying to us," he shouted, rounding on Mom. "How could you? All these years." Mom burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake, just once." As they argued, I sat there, feeling more alone than ever. Not only was I fighting for my life, but now I discovered that the man I'd called Dad my whole life wasn't really my father at all. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt like I was drowning. My mom's affair, my dad not being my real father, and the looming threat of my leukemia relapse, it was all too much. "Please," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, where's my real father? He could be a donor, right? He could save me?" Mom's tear-stained face contorted with anguish. "Sophia, I can't. It would destroy everything." "Everything's already destroyed." Dad, or should I say, the man I thought was my dad, shouted. He paced the small hospital room like a caged animal. "Tell her who her real father is." But Mom just shook her head, lips pressed tightly together. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, literally fighting for my life, and she was more concerned about keeping her secret. The days that followed were a nightmare. My health deteriorated rapidly. I could feel myself getting weaker, could see the worry in the doctor's eyes as they checked my vitals. And still, Mom refused to budge. It was Grandma who finally broke through to Mom. She came to visit me in the hospital, took one look at my gaunt face, and marched straight to where Mom was sitting. "Maria," she said, her voice steely. "Enough is enough. That man you had an affair with, he's Sophia's only chance now. You need to contact him." Mom burst into fresh tears. But what about our family? What about family?" Grandma cut her off. "Look at your daughter, Maria. Really look at her. She's your family, and she's dying. Nothing else matters now." I held my breath, watching Mom's face. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll do it." The next few hours were a blur. Mom made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones that I couldn't quite make out. Then we waited. The tension in the room was palpable. Dad, or rather, the man I'd always thought was my dad, sat in the corner, his face a mask of anger and hurt. And then, suddenly, he was there. My biological father. He burst into the room, out of breath like he'd been running. The doctors wasted no time. They whisked him away for tests, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the fractured remains of what I'd thought was my family. Hours later, the doctor returned, a smile on his face for the first time in days. "Good news," he said. "He's a perfect match. We can proceed with the transplant immediately." Relief washed over me, so strong I felt dizzy with it. I was going to live. I had a chance. The bone marrow transplant was a success. My body accepted the new cells, and I started recovering faster than anyone expected. It felt like a miracle, like I was being given a second chance at life. But I soon learned that sometimes, miracles come with a price. The day I was discharged from the hospital, my biological father came to see me. We sat in the hospital garden, away from the prying eyes of my mother and the man I'd always thought was my dad. "Sophia," he said, his voice gentle. "There's something you need to know. I've always wanted to be part of your life." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'd been sending money to your mother for years, trying to support you. But she always told me you didn't want to see me. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. All these years, I'd had a father who wanted me, and I never knew. But I didn't have time to process this information. As soon as I got home, everything fell apart. John, the man I'd called Dad my whole life, was waiting with packed bags. "I'm leaving," he announced coldly. "I've filed for divorce." Mom started crying, begging him to reconsider, but he was unmoved. "I'd done DNA tests on Anna and Maria too," he said. "None of you are mine." It turned out John was infertile. He couldn't have children at all. John left that day, refusing to pay any more for us. Just like that, our family income was gone. Mom, who had never worked a day in her life, was suddenly faced with the reality of having to support 3 children on her own. "This is all your fault," Anna spat at me one day. "If you hadn't gotten sick, none of this would have happened." "Yeah," Maria chimed in. "Why couldn't you just die instead of ruining everything?" Their words cut deep, but not as deep as Mom's silence. She never defended me, never told them to stop. Instead, she threw herself into job hunting, coming home each day more frustrated and tired than before. When she finally found a job, things only got worse. She was exhausted all the time and used to the demands of working. And somehow, I became the target of all her frustrations. "Sophia," she'd say as soon as she walked in the door. "Why isn't dinner ready? Why isn't the house clean? Don't you know how hard I'm working to keep a roof over your head?" Suddenly, I found myself playing the role of housekeeper. I'd rush home from school to cook and clean, trying desperately to please Mom and my sisters. But nothing was ever good enough. Every day, Mom reminded me that it was my fault everything was revealed. "You need to atone for your guilt," she'd say. "If it wasn't for your illness, we'd still be a happy family?" The weight of their accusations was crushing. I'd survived cancer, but for what? To live in this hell? My sisters hated me. My mother resented me. The house that was once my home had become a prison. As I scrubbed floors and cooked meals that would never be appreciated, I dreamed of the day I could graduate and leave this all behind. "You can forget about college," Mom told me one day. "We can't afford it, and it's not like you deserve it anyway." Her words were like a slap in the face. I'd always dreamed of going to college, of building a life for myself. Now, it seemed like even that was being taken away from me. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Mom came up with a new way to exploit the situation. One day, she cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes gleaming with a look I'd come to dread. "Sophia," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "I need you to go to your biological father and ask him for more money. We're struggling, Sophia. You owe us this much." I nodded silently and made the call. To my surprise, my biological father agreed without hesitation. He doubled the monthly payments, saying he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. If only he knew the truth. The next day, Mom quit her job. I thought maybe this meant things would get better, that she'd take over some of the housework. But no, all the chores still fell to me. The only difference was that now Mom had more time to criticize my efforts. For a while, things were, well, not good, but manageable. Then the money started running out again. And once again, Mom turned to me. "Sophia, we need more money. Go ask your father again." Feeling defeated, I made the call. My biological father, bless him, transferred $5,000 without question. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would make things better at home. How wrong I was. The day after the money arrived, Mom took Anna and Maria on a shopping spree. They came home laden with bags from expensive boutiques, laughing and chatting like I'd never seen before. I waited, hoping there might be something for me too. But there was nothing. Not a single item of clothing, not even a cheap t-shirt from a discount store. I was still wearing the same worn-out clothes I'd had before my illness, now hanging off my too-thin frame. It wasn't just clothes either. Mom started buying gourmet foods and expensive cuts of meat for herself and my sisters. For me? The cheapest, most basic ingredients she could find. Trying to cook decent meals with these subpar ingredients was a nightmare. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. As Mom critiqued yet another meal I'd slaved over, I snapped. Maybe if you bought some decent ingredients, I could cook better meals. I shouted, immediately regretting my outburst as I saw Mom's face darken. How dare you, she hissed. You're lucky I didn't let you die when I had the chance. Now shut up and eat what I give you. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my sisters trying on their new clothes, I made a silent vow. Someday, somehow, I would escape this. Because if I didn't, I was afraid of what I might become in this house of hatred and lies. As my 14th birthday approached, I couldn't help but notice how different I looked from my friends at school. They had nice clothes, new shoes, while I was still wearing the same worn-out outfits I'd had before my illness. That's when I started my secret savings plan. My biological father had started giving me a small allowance, and instead of spending it, I carefully tucked each bill into my old teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles. It wasn't much, but I dreamed of buying myself something nice for my birthday. But even that small dream was shattered. One day, I came home to find Mom sitting on my bed, Mr. Snuggles torn open beside her, my precious savings in her hand. Mom, no, I cried out. That's my money. Her face twisted with anger. Your money? Nothing in this house is yours, Sophia. You're an ungrateful little creature, you know that? You sacrificed my marriage, your sister's happiness, all to save yourself. And now you're hiding money from us? Something inside me snapped. All the pain, all the resentment I'd been holding back for months, came pouring out. I didn't ask for any of this, I shouted. I didn't ask to get sick, I didn't ask you to lie about who my father was. I'm sorry your life isn't perfect, but it's not my fault. For a moment, Mom looked shocked. Then her face hardened. Get out of my sight, she hissed. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I packed a small bag with what few belongings I had. I took one last look around the room that had been both my sanctuary and my prison, then slipped out the front door. I made my way across town to my biological father's house. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, tears streaming down my face, he didn't hesitate. Sophia, he said gently, what happened? Through my sobs, I managed to explain everything, the neglect, the verbal abuse, the stolen money. Please, I begged, can I stay with you? I can't go back there. His face softened with compassion. Of course you can, Sophia. You're always welcome here. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My father hired a lawyer and filed for custody. Mom, predictably, threw a massive fit. She showed up at the courthouse, screaming about how she didn't want to work, how she needed the money my father had been sending. But in the end, it didn't matter. The judge took one look at me, still too thin, wearing clothes that were practically falling apart, and awarded full custody to my father. Living with my father was like stepping into a different world. He was kind, attentive, always asking about my day, and actually listening to my answers. We went for walks in the park, talked for hours about books and movies, even took a short trip to the beach. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Loved, like I mattered. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was graduating high school. My father, true to his word, supported me every step of the way. On graduation day, he surprised me with news that left me speechless. Sophia, he said, his eyes twinkling, I've got something for you. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a deed to an apartment, my very own place, and acceptance letters to colleges in another city. Dad, I gasped, I can't believe this. He pulled me into a hug. It's the least I can do, sweetheart. Consider it compensation for all those years we missed. As I prepared to leave for college, I decided to rent out the apartment. It would provide some extra income while I was away. I hired a reputable real estate agent to handle everything, feeling like a real adult for the first time in my life. College life was everything I'd dreamed of and more. I threw myself into my studies, made new friends, and started to heal from the traumas of my past. For once, life was good. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was my real estate agent, and he sounded worried. "Sophia, we have a problem," he said. "The tenants have been kicked out of your apartment by a woman claiming to be the owner. They described her, and, well, it sounds like it might be your mother." My blood ran cold. Mom. Of course, she would find a way to intrude on my life just when things were going well. When I arrived at my apartment, I took a deep breath before knocking. The door swung open, and there she was, Mom, looking older but with the same hard glint in her eyes I remembered so well. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who's come home." I pushed past her into the apartment, my apartment. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "You have no right to be here. This is my property." Mom's face twisted into a sneer. "I have every right. I'm your mother, aren't I? Everything you have should be mine." "Are you kidding me?" I felt my anger rising. "You spent years taking money from my biological father, money that was meant for me. You treated me like a servant, like a burden. You have no claim to anything of mine." "How dare you?" Mom's voice rose. "After everything I've done for you. I saved your life, ungrateful child. I could have let you die, but I found your real father, didn't I?" I laughed bitterly. "Found him? You hid him from me for years. You lied and cheated and made my life hell. And now you think you can just waltz in and take my apartment?" For a moment, Mom looked taken aback by my outburst. Then, her face crumpled, and she began to cry. As I watched my mother cry, her makeup smearing across her face, I felt a twinge of pity. But I'd learned the hard way not to let my guard down around her. "Sophia," she sniffled, her voice taking on a pleading tone, "you don't understand. I have nowhere to go. I'd been kicked out of my apartment because I couldn't pay the rent. Your sisters, they've moved out and won't let me stay with them. Your father stopped sending money. I have nothing, Sophia, nothing." I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the flood of emotions her words triggered. "Mom," I said firmly, "I'm sorry you're in this situation, but it's not my responsibility to fix it. You're an adult. You need to get a job and support yourself." Her tears dried up instantly, replaced by a look of indignation. "A job? At my age? After everything I've been through? No, Sophia, I'm not leaving. This is my apartment now, and you can't make me go." I felt a surge of anger at her entitlement. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "We'll see about that," I said. When the police arrived, I explained the situation calmly, showing them the deed to the apartment. The officer listened patiently, then turned to my mother. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you're trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Mom's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this to me. I'm her mother." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The officer escorted her out, giving her a stern warning about the consequences of returning without permission. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. As soon as the police left, Mom started screaming outside my window, hurling insults and accusations. "Look at her," she yelled to anyone who would listen. "My own daughter, throwing her mother out on the street. After everything I've done for her, she abandons me." I closed the curtains, trying to block out her voice, but I could still hear her tirade. To my relief, none of the neighbors seemed to be paying her any attention. Eventually, realizing she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted, she left. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Sophia," he said, his voice tinged with concern, "are you okay?" "Your mother, she came to see me." I felt my stomach drop. What did she want? Dad sighed. "She tried to reconcile, if you can believe it. Said we should get back together, be a family again. I told her no, of course. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I'm fine, Dad. Thank you for everything. The next day, I returned to college, throwing myself back into my studies with renewed determination. The incident with Mom had shaken me, but it also reinforced my resolve to build a life for myself, on my own terms. For years flew by in a blur of classes, exams, and new experiences. Before I knew it, I was graduating college, diploma in hand, and the world at my feet. I made the decision to return to my hometown, to the apartment that had caused so much drama. It felt right, somehow, to come full circle. As I unpacked my boxes and settled into my new life, I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. I had a good job lined up, a place of my own, and a future full of possibilities. I made a conscious decision to cut ties with my mother and sisters. The toxicity of those relationships had no place in my new life. Instead, I focused on nurturing my relationship with my biological father, the one person who had consistently supported and loved me. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset over the city I once couldn't wait to leave, I realized something profound. The hardships I'd faced, the illness, the family drama, the betrayals, they hadn't broken me. They had made me stronger, more resilient.